Elizabeth to the point that it made me awkward around her, uncomfortable around her, but I was always really madly in love with her. And, you know, it was really profound for me. So.
It's been my experience of, and good fortune to have many artists for friends, and I couldn't help but notice that when artists get together, they often talk about art, you know, and perhaps children or dealers or museums or whatever, but mostly it's a lot about art. Did you have conversations with her, Judy, with Elizabeth about art, and or was there an exchange? And Susanna, I would like to put the same question to you.
All the time. But not only did we talk about art all the time,
Can you use the microphone?
not only did we talk about art all the time, it seemed like when she was talking about life, she was talking about art too.
Yeah.
She was all of a piece. Her work was really reflected in her. I mean, her, like I said before, her toughness, her rigor, her fearlessness came through in conversations about everything. And her intelligence, and yes, about art. She loved to, let me think of some better examples where you can talk while I'm thinking.
Well, I want to talk about her art a little bit, but I also want to say that the one thing I loved most about her was that she may have said that she wanted to play with the big boys, but I didn't feel like that was on her mind, ever. And that was a relief to me because I didn't care about boys at all. I just wanted the approval of other women artists, many of whom are here. Joan,
Yeah.
you know, many. And, you know, that's what mattered to me. So I'm a little bit younger than you, maybe like 5 minutes. So I had the benefit of that, I guess. But her, you know, I would just repeat myself in saying that the humor in her work is in the form, and the anger is in it too. And I felt like that she was able to take those qualities that are very real, very visceral, and make them an abstract painting. So the physicality of the work was what I'm sure those of you who worked with it, you know, really got to handle it even more than I ever did. I mean, I was around when Steve is here, DeFrank, and Warren were, and I guess Wallace, maybe you were working there too, I didn't know, but on the same floor on 15th Street. And all the pieces, the wood pieces were built there before she moved them out to Williamsburg when she moved downtown. But she was completely involved in every level of the work. And the drawings that she did were really thinking drawings. And that's what I think is great about this show, is that you don't see variations on a theme, you see a lot of ways of thinking through something, and places that she would abandon the idea and move to the next. And, you know, a real dissection of things in the world to the point of really just maintaining some relationship to how something sits or leans, or, you know, it was sculptural, really. I mean, that's sort of obvious, but then to stick it up on the wall is so crazy and absurd, and so much like her way of looking at the world. You know, she just had a really dark sense of humor that was just outrageous, and you know, she shared that. So there's a lot of generosity in the actual paintings as well as restraint. And anyway, I don't remember what the question was.
You answered it. Pat, did you want to?
I'm just handing the mic.
If anybody has any questions or disputes or anything, feel free to shout out.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
I remember the meeting Paula Cooper's gallery, because Paula Cooper was making a change of direction in her gallery, and she asked if she, like Jennifer Bartlett and Elizabeth Burns, leave the gallery. I mean,
That is true, that did happen. Yeah. That Paula, at one point, you know, she changed almost the whole roster of people, like Jennifer Bartlett and everyone. And moved on Joel Shapiro. Yeah. Yes?
Wasn't there another retrospective at the Whitney earlier? That's the one I'm remembering.
Aha.
Yeah, the mid-eighties.
When was that?
That was a wonderful show.
87. 87?
Yeah.
When was that?
It was the
87
late 80s, yeah.
or 88 or 86, somewhere in there.
87. 84. Toured all over the U.S. and ended at the Whitney's in 88.
Thank you.
You know, she had fantastic opportunities.
Yes.
And, you know, she had a retrospective at Whitney, and then she had one at MoMA. How many women can say that? Kiki, I think? So unusual. And every time she hit it out of the park. And she had Paula, and she had Case. These are levels of excellence most people would die for, you know? It's like, those are incredible opportunities. I can't really think of another woman painter who had them while they were alive.
I know what you mean. When I first, the first time I saw her work, I didn't really know very much about art. I wasn't working in the art world. I just, I lived in Soho, so I went to galleries. Because that's what there was to do. And I thought she was a famous woman artist, you know, but just plain famous artist. I wasn't thinking of her as a woman artist, but that was one of the reasons I felt so drawn to the paintings that are, like what you said about anger and humor. I saw that immediately, I think, in the work, and that was an attraction. And that a woman made it and not a man meant something more to me. But if I mentioned her name to other people, like, who's Elizabeth Murray? And I thought she was huge.
Yeah. You know, she was, and that's why, the question is, why isn't she huger? She had the opportunities. She knocked them out of the ballpark. The Whitney, the MoMA, Pace, Paula. It doesn't get any better than that.
MacArthur.
The MacArthur.
No one ever says the
And the
MacArthur.
MacArthur. So here's someone who happened to be female that I think most people in this room agree was a great artist, capital G. There's a lot of really good artists. There are very few great artists. I'm here to say I believe that Elizabeth was a truly great artist. The MacArthur, another thing. The train station, right? The Bloomingdale's train station. Was this, I don't even know that.
Well,
We are on 23rd. Damn. Okay, I didn't even know that. So the question is, here's someone who did have all these remarkable, every single great opportunity. Why isn't she Frank Stella? Why isn't she,
I'm so glad she's not.
but you know, why isn't she Richard Serra? You know, and I guess of course, but she was remarkable for so many reasons. But one of the great things that's so remarkable about her career is she had these incredible opportunities.
May I say something?
Please.
No, I think the problem is why it was known. It was known in New York mostly.
Not Europe.
It didn't get known. It didn't get seen in Europe, and that was a limitation. That she or her representatives didn't promote her work in Europe, so it wasn't known there, and it wasn't known really in a lot of the United States. It wasn't known in California, and we can have a museum show that travels from one museum to another in the States, and there's so many artists. When we started, there were 20 women artists. Now there must be hundreds. And there's so many artists now that they keep a reputation and visual memory alive. It has to be, and promoting things is the name of the day. And that's why it isn't alive now, because it was known in it was famous, but it was famous mostly in New York.
Because I don't want to indulge in a rescue mission of a lost soul, which is partly how some women get revived, and I'm always uncomfortable with it. I mean, Elizabeth did participate, and the one thing that I learned from her was that participation was sort of a responsibility to the work itself. Now, not everybody gets to participate when they want to, and there's a matter of luck, but there's also a certain kind of desire to be part of it and also take all the hits. And I think it was Carrie James Marshall who was speaking to the Columbia students that a couple months ago, who said really clearly, straight at everybody, it's really important to participate. And he didn't say it was a responsibility, but he sort of said, don't get involved with nonprofit things, and that was his approach to it. And I know why he was saying that. But she also had a very similar to Chicago artists also. And I think that thinking about this gallery where we are was started by 4 artists. And so if you can't break into the box, you make it, you make your own. And I mean, this place right here is an example of how that happens. So I just wanted to add that.
Well, I would like, if Jenny also started a gallery as well as, has a very active career as a painter, but you co-founded the Regina Rex Gallery, which now is on it started in Brooklyn, now it's in this neighborhood, or vaguely in this neighborhood. What was the impulse behind that?
12 of us started the gallery almost 7 years ago in Bushwick, and the impulse was to make a space to talk about art. So we met on a weekly basis and discussed what we see out in the world. We right away sort of gutturally decided that we will not show ourselves. We made that decision and we stuck to it. Did not know that that's what will be mentioned in every article. We had no idea that it's that important, but we just decided that we would serve as a platform for conversation and for showing artists who we see out in the world who don't have opportunities. So we've been doing that. I don't know how many shows we've curated, but probably over 100. And it was just a way to, if you move to New York or you go to grad school here and then you're in your early 30s, late 20s, and you go to an opening and you kind of just lean against the wall in Chelsea and you don't matter, and you're the best artist ever, your voice isn't heard. So we wanted to hear each other. I mean, we wanted a space. I started seeing it as a kind of living room where I receive guests, but that is what instead of a dinner we speak about. Instead of a dinner table, we share art. So, it's been a really incredible project. And come and visit us. Whoever doesn't know where we are, we're on Madison Street, just nearby.
Judy, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say, I was grateful to Douglas for giving her that show that when she was dying, because she really rallied, and it was so moving to see such a rigorous, funny, angry show, and she was really dying. And just in terms of, we were talking about the retrospectives and this and that, I thought that was one of the great things that she was able to do in her lifetime.
I agree. I think I even wrote about that show. I was so excited about it. I know I wrote about at least one of the shows. I just don't remember now what it was. Pat?
Oh, I just have a classic Elizabeth story. When she was really at the end, we had dinner at Maggie Tracker's house. And Elizabeth had used tape to separate the colors, taped lines, as I do. And she had a curved taped line, and I couldn't understand, a real curve. Couldn't understand how she did it. And she was so sick. She carefully explained how to tape the line to me, very carefully, every step of the way. And then she said, if you use it, I'll sue you.
Thanks, that's great.
Did you use it?
If I use
Did you?
Did you use
Use
it?
it?
Absolutely not. I don't want her to harm me.
Last night I went to, I was at the opening of an exhibition by an abstract painter, Marina Adams, and I walked in and one of the and maybe it was because I was thinking about this show and coming here today, I don't know, but the first painting I looked at made me think of Elizabeth so much, and the one they weren't, I mean, I guess it was the color, and there was a certain swoop and swerve of line that made me think of Elizabeth. So I asked Marina if she was ever at all influenced by Elizabeth Murray, and she looked at me and took me by the shoulders and said, that was the biggest, most important influence on my life, was her work. And it was, I almost started to cry. I mean, it was quite moving, and she was so vehement about it, and she made a beautiful show, and I love seeing how, you know, the kind of energy and ideas and inventiveness and determination and stick-to-itiveness and detail that's in all of these drawings filters down through time, and every time you come back to the original work, it seems bigger and more important and deeper, at least that's the way it seems to me. Do you want to read what you
I
wrote?
don't know. I just brought this just to refer to it. I didn't mean to read it, no. I mean,
Okay. Have you referred to it?
a little bit, yeah. I can if you want. This was, I wrote
Use the
something.
microphone, Judy.
Okay. I wrote this, Elizabeth asked me to introduce her for this award she got at BOM. And I just brought it because I, wanted to maybe, and so I wrote something about how basically alive Elizabeth's work was, is what the idea was. I can read it, I guess. Anyway. Talking about going to the retrospective, I hadn't anticipated the feeling of freedom of unruly life. The work appeared electroshocked into being. In fact, they looked like they couldn't wait until we left so they could start messing around, dancing, and taking off their clothes. I imagine the paintings over the years in Elizabeth's studio taking on a life of their own, greedily going through drawers, pulling out socks and scarves and hats and gloves and necklaces, getting ready for the dance. I think they started with a slow one by Al Green. They're bumping, humping. A cobalt blue hat is knocked to the side like a gangster lean. A leg flashes a fuchsia argyle sock. Another one, Coraline fishnet. I see a rush of legs, arms, fingers. It's getting hot in here. Poppers are passed around. Sly and the Family Stone want to take you higher. A reel of chartreuse flashes by. Marvin Gaye makes his pitch for sexual healing. All the paintings are trying to undress, but they don't want to get completely naked. It's not as sexy. Yeah, that's one thing we didn't mention. Her paintings are so sexy. A chrome yellow sweater flies off an arm. Sap green pants are unzipped, hanging around cerulean ankles. The music gets louder. Handel's Messiah is playing. It's unstoppable now. Off goes a shoe. It lands on a head. A toe goes up the ass of the painting next to it. The paintings are on top of each other, overlapping, fucking, sucking, tying each other up. Oh, one sits in the corner crying acrimony tears. Its cadmium heart has burst right through its skin and it's throbbing. One is self-absorbed solo, pretending to be a whirling dervish. Hallelujah. There's drunkenness and goofiness. They're in love with their unease. A show-off is doing acrobatics. That one's so crude. They're all trading clothes and vamping. Now they're stoned and famished, they eat too much. They're flushed and overheated, impenitent. Finally, Elizabeth says enough. They freeze. The images take hold. And then I just mentioned that the Love Fest was everybody stood for 10 minutes and clapped. A 10-minute standing ovation for Elizabeth at MoMA. So long that my lazy-ass husband started to look around to see if he could sit down. There was just one guy sitting, but that was enough. So feeling like he was no longer in danger of being the first to cave in, he began to furtively ease back into his seat. But then that person ruined his play by rising to his feet. It was Chuck Close.
Thank you. That's great. Kiandra, you had a few museum shows, 3. So, fairly young age. I don't know how old you are, but 36. So that's a good thing that this also happens now. And I'm sorry I don't know your work, but you can bet I'm going to pursue it from now. When you're making your art, does what you know of Elizabeth, what your experience, does it enter into your process at all? And in what way?
Definitely, all the time. Sort of hard for it not to after going through literally someone's body of work for their entire life. Sometimes my work, this one's a little bit better. Sometimes the work is three-dimensional. I have no idea how to do it, but I know I have to do it, and I know that people have done it before, and there's no excuses, and that is exactly Elizabeth. But also, you talked about galleries and getting into the scene and getting your work shown, but she was dedicated to making work absent of that. She purchased her home. She physically set up her life so that she could do it regardless of anyone's say-so. And that has been incredibly helpful for me. I moved to upstate New York because I want to do this, and it's impossible to do things in this city. It's incredibly hard, especially to get focused. And I still don't have walls, but but it's mine, and it's a workspace, and I can do what I want. And that definitely was through Elizabeth's example. And also through, her family supporting artists and giving them jobs, working in the arts still. I continue to work for them. We moved the works into a secure facility. So I was driving in and ending up in these massive warehouses in New York, and it's me and all this beautiful color. I could list a million ways that Elizabeth is important. Certainly color sticks in my mind. And even in my work, but in the world, we say artists are ahead of their time. I wrote down the piece, The Sun and the Moon, which is a large, colorful painting in 2005. I could completely imagine sending that to someone over my phone. Right? It communicates, and it's instant. And it's new. It's new to us now, but she has hashtags before hashtags are a thing. They're in her paintings. So I think not only the way the work looks, there's the Maccabi show, there's that gigantic Maccabi in the Art Institute of Chicago, which if you're a student, you get to walk through the museum on the way to your studio. The color that pops out in that is the color that pops up in Elizabeth. Often it's shocking, and it seems from a different age. And so these are all things that I think if you're working, you have to deal with and think about in a pleasurable way. Her work is about these puzzles and revisiting, and revisiting. And it's dedication, from making a drawing to making a collage of the drawing to becoming three-dimensional, to having the shapes. And that's very difficult know the form and have to, be responsible for that all the way through many different kinds of medium. So, I can't, there's a million ways that she sets an example for everyone artistically, and also how do you do this long term, regardless of whether or not people like your work.
How do you?
Well, I'm still working on it. Faith, luck, rice and beans. and community, and interest.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to sacrifice A to get B. You can't, that's how life is.
Comments, questions, stories? Yes?
I guess I wanted to ask you, since you've seen the breadth of her work most recently, but when I look at Elizabeth's work over a long period of time, one of the things that she really imbued her feminism with elevating the content of female life within the work and the kitchen, the chairs, the umbilical cords, that it felt like she didn't have to write it out. It was embedded in the work itself. And she was also very blunt. And I think that shows. So I guess I wondered any thoughts you had in looking at the breadth of her work on that. But I do want to say one story about Elizabeth, that being in her studio, anyway, not important, but that I was looking at a painting, and I was much younger, and I was looking at it and I was trying to be smart, so I said, that's an interesting table shape you have there. And she said, Kay, it's a table. And I love that about her, but if you have a thought about that.
I think everything that you said seems to resonate with me too. I mean, it's in the work, she's picking the object she wants to pick. She's working with the form she wants to work with. She did write a great deal. And maybe, and I'm speculating here, so maybe that gets distilled in the work, and I think that's the strength of the work, is that it has this energy and it leaves something vibrating in it, both in the color but also in the subject matter, which is open, and also, it's abstract, it's representational at the same time. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it seems to me that she was always, and not without reservation, not without, we talk about people being strong and brave, but that's when you know what you're up against, otherwise you're kind of foolish, right? That's the difference. So going through her work, going through her diaries, her choices seem very deliberate and unapologetic in this way that I want to paint this. It's in my head, I'm going to put it on a piece of paper. Why should there be a question in between those two things? So that's the immediacy that...
She was very clear.
Yeah.
As a painter, I'm really interested in conversations about what is it, especially abstract painting. And I'm really, when I look at these drawings, I kind of wonder about what version of abstraction are we looking at, and why this show touched a nerve when it did, and what we can take from it as artists and people who didn't know her or just coming to the work for the first time. And what I see in this room, the word anger and humor, those two kind of resonate, and where are they in the drawings themselves? Like, where would one who maybe couldn't see that, where would you direct them to look at? And what about these drawings could be made today, and what part of them isn't possible to be made? To me, this idea of rendering form seems really kind of unique to her in some sense, like this kind of rabid modeling of material for the form, and this kind of energy she brought to it. And I wonder if what we've seen in abstraction recently, if that's even possible anymore. And that's sort of like a blanket question. Thoughts kind of went off in my brain. What is this And where is this, how is this present and how is this like of its time and what can we take from it now?
Yeah, well, I think it has to, a lot of the humor and the anger has something to do with the scrubbing and the rubbing and the burying of something, which, you know, she hasn't always done and didn't always do in her work. And especially at the end, I think it weirdly turned more into a kind of joy, and that deep sense of the absurdity of life showed up in, I think, the way the forms kind of bump up against each other, lean on each other. It has to do with the, you know, like in this drawing, just the way things kind of try to fit, where a circle tries to fit into a square and doesn't. And of course it doesn't. And what are the shapes that come out of that? Just something as basic as that. And she just played and struggled with it. And maybe the struggle part of the work is what makes some people uncomfortable with it. But I guess I see that, I read that more as the sometimes almost rage, like, but humor, it always, you know, it wasn't like, the thing is that the forms are not mean, they're angry. And I think there's a really big difference between those two things. There's a, you know, a pissed off understanding of how fucked up the world can be, without letting herself get bitter. And I think it's in the form. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's in that rubbing and.
Yeah, I think that.
Do you think? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I see like cartoon, and which seems about memory to me. Like these are her experiences kind of brought forth within where she took them. And I think that physical thing you're talking about really comes in the second. That's the second here in her paintings, is watching her render something with such fierceness and really kind of like something that's elegant in some ways, but like she was tenacious in her paint handling and the way she put the material on the surfaces, and it was like, it became like skin for her, to me, you know, it really, she imbued them with a lot, and the drawings are really nice to see because they're not mediated by the Belgian linen and the, you know, the really nice oil paint. It's sort of her and a colored pencil and a sheet of paper, so you can kind of see the ferocity, I guess. And
Yeah,
that seems.
And joy too, because I think it's a lot like being in a club, you know, a really crowded, very dark club. When people are dancing and they're really aware of each other physically, but not necessarily making eye contact. And that's how I read the forms. Not in everything, but, you know, even that. But Steve, actually, you built these, a lot of these.
Yeah.
So maybe
you know, one of the things, you know, that to me about Elizabeth, you know, being a young kid, right out of undergraduate school, I mean, I met Elizabeth 30 years ago, and, you know, I'm Louis Coleman, brother, partners, and, you know, Elizabeth taught me how to be an artist. You know, and not by doing anything, just showed me. And one of the things I loved, I was so worried about making some of these pieces, because I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. And she was like, exactly. Right? Because we wanted to hire, you know, like they were like, you know, we'd hire, you know, someone wanted to hire like a guy who would design planes, and she was like, no, they know what they're doing. Right? So we were like, you know, in the dark half the time, but that was half the fun. But one of the things about Elizabeth, man, that really impresses me most was she reached out to younger artists. She collected younger artists' work. You know, she really made it a point to have that communication. And for a young artist at the time, I mean, that opened up, it gave me like, oh my God. I was recognized by, you know, this famous artist, you know, looked at me and said, hey, I'd like to have that. You know, she won a grant or an award, and she came to me and she said, Steve, I'd like to buy a piece with that. And I was like, oh, I'll give you a deal. And she's like, no, here's the award money. You know, I mean, how many artists do that? You know? And so she was so generous.
Yeah, on that generosity note, when she did the, curated the show at MoMA, which is another thing we can add to her, you know, incredible opportunities. I think a lot of artists do that and they sort of make a show about their own work. And that's not at all what she did. You know, she went in and found these wonderful pieces that had never or were rarely shown, you know, all of them by women, and that was the show. And that seemed to me like a very generous act.
Yeah.
When was that?
Isn't it like 94 or something? Is that, that's like,
It was in the 90s, I think it was later, the Artist's Choice show, I remember that, that was amazing. I mean, there have been many of those shows. Hers was very distinctively different, and we saw things we never saw at home.
like Mary Bauermeister, I didn't know her work at all. There was a lot of work in that show that she really dug into the archive.
And then she called it Mama's Mamas. You know, such a great, funny, pointed, perfect, political, but humorous.
And a gem.
Yeah.
Anyone else have something to add? Any of you?
I just want to say that these drawings are fantastic, and this is a great dress. We forgot to mention that these drawings are fantastic, and that Elizabeth was a great draftsman. She had the gift in her hand.
Yes.
And it's not necessary to have that gift to be an artist, but she had it.
One thing I'll never forget about Elizabeth was a few days after 9/11, and I went downtown with Keith Saunier, who had left his loft on Chambers Street with most of the rest of the neighborhood around the World Trade Center, which was evacuated and had no heat or no electricity, no phone service, no water. But there was Elizabeth in her studio. We stopped by, and she couldn't leave the work. She couldn't leave working. She was steadfast and determined to see it through. Am I right about that? You were there. And I thought, it must have been terribly difficult. I mean, you know, no water. But there she was, and there she remained, and there she kept working her way through it. And I mean, it kind of, I think about that a lot in moments when I feel kind of down or discouraged, and it helps. It helps me, you know, stop feeling sorry for myself and pay attention to the things that are important. So she meant a lot to me. I wasn't her closest friend. I knew her a little, but every time I saw her it was a revelation of something or other. I think she had a great deal of compassion as well as the generosity we've heard about. And for me, there's a drawing right there on the wall for a painting, I think for Tangled. And it really grabbed me out of all the 50 drawings here. And it's kind of simple and complicated at the same time. And it's a totally abstract drawing with the shape of a kind of heart. And it's like beating. And that's what I felt about looking at that. And I know the painting that she did, or many paintings that she made similar. And, you know, I wish I could take it home. I don't have any of her work at home. But I do think she was a great artist. I thank everyone here for speaking the way they did today. It's been very illuminating, embracing, and wonderful to live with the legacy of Elizabeth Murray and her work. And thank you all for paying such close attention and showing up with us.
Thank you.
On behalf of the state of Elizabeth, I want to thank the panels. Join me in thanking Linda for doing such an amazing, exciting job. I want to remind everybody about the film, and one thing that I thought that I took away from this, not only from Elizabeth but from Carmen Herrera. It's a really great caption portrait of her as well. It's so hard to have artists talk about art, they like to art about art. That's what Carmen said. It's a great film. Go see the film. Is up through, Christy is through Wednesday, right? Tuesday is the last day, all right? Thank you, Canada. Thank you, Emily. Everybody shows up through the end of the month, end of the year. The 29th, tell all of your friends. Thank you for coming and get home safe. Oh, one more thing. ElizabethMurrayArt.org. Check it out.
And thank you, Kate.